Hi, everybody. My name is Sydney Williams, and I am the author and founder of Hiking My Feelings. And I am honored to be a speaker here at this summit for people of color living with diabetes. Thank you so much to the Diversity and Diabetes team for having me. I am excited to share a little bit about my story living with diabetes, how I manage it, and how hiking helps me heal my mind and body. Some mindfulness tips for when you go out for a hike, and a little exercise I like to call trail thoughts, which will introduce you to hiking as a mindfulness activity. Now, when I say hiking, I'm not saying like you got to go hike Mount Everest to go get this healing in nature. In fact, last year in 2021, Hiking My Feelings hosted a campaign called Take a Hike Diabetes, and we showcased two really incredible trails to increase access to what we call nearby nature. And that's the parks and green spaces in the cities and towns where we work, live, and play. So we hiked 220 miles around the city of Chicago. That entire trail is accessible via public transportation. So you don't have to have a car to get out there. You just need to have some time to go take a walk, and it connects existing pedestrian walkways, the trail system throughout Chicago, the Cook County Forest Preserves, and more green spaces to make a 220-mile loop that goes around the city. We also hiked across the state of Michigan on the Great Lake to Lake Trail Route number 1. And that was 248 miles, mostly rail to trail, which means they took an old railway corridor and turned it into a trail for multi-use between hiking, biking, and walking. So I'm really excited to share a little bit about some of the stuff we've done as an organization, how I use hiking to manage my diabetes, and welcome you into what we call wellness in the wilderness. So a little bit about me. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2017, and it was a big catalyst for change for me. I say to this day, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, if you're in the audience and you're like, why would diabetes be the best thing that's ever happened to you? I will share why over the course of our time together today. But the short answer to the long story is it was that moment. And maybe you can relate. Maybe you've had one of these moments, maybe a loved one passed away, or you had a close encounter with death, or you got fired unexpectedly and everything turned around from there. My diabetes diagnosis was that for me. It was something that wasn't so serious, like a stage 4 cancer diagnosis to where my entire life was upended, but it was serious enough for me to take immediate action and just really start working towards the person that I wanted to be and live the life I wanted to live in order to manage my diabetes effectively. So I credit my doctor for making diabetes management easier to understand. As we all know, living with this disease is not easy. There are so many factors that can impact our blood sugar levels in our bodies, but my doctor divided it up into what I call my little happy quadrant. So it's food, medicine, exercise, and stress. So upon my diagnosis, after going to some nutrition classes at the hospital, I stopped eating like a 12-year-old boy, started eating more vegetables, no more frozen pizza, no more Ben and Jerry's for breakfast when I was feeling sad. I cleaned up my diet. I started walking every day as part of a movement plan to manage my diabetes. The CDC recommends at least 15 minutes, 5 days a week. I did that and then some. So I started with walks around my neighborhood. When that got to be too easy to go up and down this, like what I call the hill of death in our old neighborhood, when that got to be too easy, I graduated to local hiking trails and eventually started doing longer distances, longer times out in nature. And one of the things that was really cool for me in those moments was I was at the peak of my corporate career. I was working in corporate communications with a marketing firm. My big client was NBC Universal. I got diagnosed the week before fall premieres. So if you watch TV, you know fall premieres is where it's at. We're going to tell you all day, every day that your favorite show starts on Thursday. Don't forget to tune in. It was the peak of everything I was doing in corporate communications. And the stress was through the roof. So I cleaned up my diet. I started walking. I started taking my medications as prescribed. And the stress part was directly tied to those morning walks. Like I said, I was busy. Like I didn't have time for like anything, certainly not self-care. Work came first. That's where I found value for myself, was being part of its team and getting big wins for our clients. But what I realized was in the morning, instead of rolling over, reading email and freaking out and reacting to my day, I would wake up, go out, and I didn't listen to music. I wasn't listening to podcasts. I was just listening to the sounds of nature, my neighborhood, the sidewalk under my feet at the time, and then eventually the beautiful sounds of crunchy trails underneath your feet. And I became really protective of that time in the morning, because instead of waking up and reacting to my day, I took time for myself, just this 1 mile out and back, maybe 2 miles if I was feeling fancy, walk around my neighborhood just to like start my day for me. And when I got back from that, I was like, oh, I feel good. And when I wanted to feel good some more, then I had like a smoothie for breakfast or like some scrambled eggs and some veggies instead of having ice cream. So all these little steps all came together to make diabetes management much more simple. I won't say it's easy because we know that nothing about living with diabetes is easy, but it is ridiculously simple if you allow it to be. So when I got protective of my mornings, then I started getting better, air quotes, at hiking, which in that case was like urban hiking, walking in my neighborhood. I noticed that my stress would go down because I wasn't starting with the reaction to the day. My day was mine to start. And so now my morning routine, I spend several hours doing stuff that isn't work. And that's a luxury, first and foremost. I know that. It's a privilege to be able to have that time. In the time that's passed since my diagnosis in 2017, I quit my job in 2018. I joined my friend's startup. I thought that would be a stress reducer. Pro tip, it's not. And I made it about 90 days on that job before I started having panic attacks every day, almost twice a day for a period of about 2 weeks. And my blood sugar levels were going back up. I was starting to fall back into my old eating habits and drinking habits. And I was just like, this is not worth it. The juice is not worth the squeeze on this job. So I ended up leaving that position after 95 days. So I was a newly diagnosed, now uninsured and unemployed diabetic. Not the best choice I've ever made from a on paper, what's going to make my parents happy, what is societally acceptable, how do I live up to the expectations of myself as a professional and a woman and a partner and a friend. Like on paper, worst decision I've ever made. In reality, the best decision I've ever made. What happened was I quit. And before I quit, I had booked another backpacking trip on the Trans-Catalina Trail. This is a trail that spans 38 miles across Catalina Island, which is off the coast of Los Angeles, California. And I had attempted this trail in 2016, 9 months prior to my diagnosis. In 2016, I was 80 pounds heavier than I am today. I had no backpacking experience. I had no hiking experience, but I had a fat paycheck and I had a whole week off between Christmas and New Year's. So my husband, who comes from the mountains in New Hampshire, recommended we go backpacking. In 2016, I literally walked into an REI store and I was like, please fill up my backpack with everything I need. And then I walked onto the trail. I didn't train. I didn't even break in my hiking boots. I literally thought that wearing my hiking boots at my standing desk was the same as breaking them in. Pro tip number 2, that's not true either. So 2016 was tough and I had blisters a quarter mile into a 6-day adventure across this island. By the time we got towards the end of the trail, we had what the locals now call the rain event of 2016, and it washed out the last section of the trail. You can imagine my satisfaction that I didn't have to admit defeat. I could blame it on the trail being washed out. It wasn't that I was in so much pain. It wasn't that I was limping around with my feet basically like ground beef, just covered in blisters and borderline unusable. The trail was washed out, so it wasn't my fault. On that trail, while it was the hardest thing I've ever done physically, even still today, and I've done some pretty hard stuff, that hike in 2016 was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it taught me that I love my body. Even though I didn't recognize the body I was living in, I was like, oh, I like this. This is hard, but I want to do more of this. And it completely shifted the way I see myself. It completely shifted my body image issues, the way I think about how I show up in this body. Instead of being like punishing myself, I was just like, oh, I want to do more of this. I want to enjoy it. I don't want it to be this painful. And hiking and backpacking gave me this framework to think about my body image in a whole new way. I was like, oh, I want to do this and I want it to be fun. I don't want my body to be the thing that gets in the way. So approaching my nutrition and my activity and all that stuff leading into a diabetes diagnosis, I already had this framework where I was like, well, this is something that I like doing. And diabetes only gave me an excuse to do it more. So in 2018, after I quit my job, now I'm uninsured, unemployed, things are bad on paper. I had booked another attempt on the Trans-Catalina Trail for my birthday that year. And at the time I was still working in the office, I was like, losing my mind with this order that we were filling at the startup. I was really snarky and short with my business partner, and I was just at my wit's end. And I figured, hey, if I can go backpack across this island, I know it's a good reset. If I don't make it, to the end of it. Like, if I quit before I go backpack, then all I have to do is go for a walk across this island and see what happens next. I ended up going with door number 2. So I quit my job, and then I had 2 weeks to train for the Trans-Catalina Trail 2.0. So I was on top of this mountain out here in San Diego, California. It's called Cushy Pie by the indigenous people. Colonizers renamed it Stonewall Peak, but this is the peak where they promised 360-degree views of San Diego County. I was supposed to be able to see from Mexico all the way up to North County. What did I get? May gray. Socked in, not a view to be had. And in that moment, instead of being like, okay, I'm an unemployed person trying to be an influencer in the outdoors, how can I influence if there's no view? I turned inward and I was like, why am I so chill? Like, I should be freaking out. I just quit 2 jobs in the span of 5 months. I'm newly diagnosed, uninsured, unemployed, no money coming in, no backup plan. Why do I feel like I could take a nap or like I'm in Shavasana at the end of a yoga class? This is wild. And that's where I realized, oh, thanks to my diabetes diagnosis, if I wanted to be the best diabetes patient my doctor's ever seen, which I did, because that's where I put all my people-pleasing tendencies, was I couldn't eat Ben and Jerry's for breakfast when I was sad. I couldn't drink a bottle of wine to myself at night anymore to try to get to sleep and avoid remembering about all the bad stuff that I had experienced up until then. I was hiking my feelings instead of eating and drinking them. So our organization, which is now a book, an organization, retreats, programs, the Take a Hike Diabetes campaign we did last year, all of these things started with a simple idea on top of a mountain on a cloudy day. So what does all of this mean for diabetes management? Great question. It started with walks around the neighborhood. When that got to be too easy, I graduated to local trails. By the time I got to the Trans-Catalina Trail the second time, I had lost 60 pounds since I had done it the first time. I had been training. And the hiking, while hiking is a difficult endeavor, wearing a backpack in a backpacking situation with 30 plus pounds on your back makes things physically difficult. However, I could handle it. And if I could do this in 2016 with no training, in the worst shape of my life, pre-diagnosis, had no idea what was going on, and survive it. I mean, I walked funny for a couple of weeks after the first trip, but I survived it. If that was possible, what was possible for me on this second trip, where now I've been training, I'm in way better shape, I've got way more handle on my mental health, like what's possible for me on an emotional aspect outside of the physical? Because yes, hiking is difficult, but what if the hike itself wasn't the hard part? So then I go back to Catalina Island in 2018, I hike across the whole thing, I check my blood sugar the first day, and it's perfect, 107. And I was like, I am so excited. Like, I had my nutrition dialed in, I had my hydration dialed in. Like, the biggest thing that I was worried about was the ingredients on the back of the backpacking meals that I had brought. I looked at it, and these were all the ingredients of things that I hadn't been eating in the spirit of diabetes management to help bring my blood sugar down. And now all these foods are loaded with those things. We're talking pasta, carbs, rice, all the things that I had been, I don't want to say that I had cut out, because I don't think of diabetes nutrition as a restrictive plan. I think of it as a very empowering plan. So that was part of the mindset shift that went into this trip. Was I looked at this and I talked to my doctor. I was like, Doc, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. Like, is this going to send my blood sugar right back through the roof? And she was like, hey, whoa, pump the brakes. If you're out there for 6, 10, 12 hours a day, you're going to need the fuel. Don't worry about it. And I was like, what I heard was, I can eat whatever I want if I hike. Now, that's not necessarily the case. You do still have to be mindful of the things that you consume while hiking and backpacking, but there is a little bit of extra leeway. And the moral of that story was I didn't need to be worried. And now I had my blood sugar on my glucometer to confirm that. So now, with the blood sugar worries out of my head, I was open to whatever this island had to give me on an emotional perspective. And that's where I started to connect the dots between mind and body. I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and for the first 11 years after the assault, I didn't tell anybody. Didn't tell my husband, didn't tell my friend whose house it happened at, didn't tell the police, didn't go to the hospital, didn't tell my parents. Like, my husband and I met after my assault, but at the time that I felt comfortable enough to tell him, we had been together for 7 years and married for 5 years. It took me that long to realize, and this is before Me Too, I was watching The Bachelor on TV, and my husband paused it because the girls were talking about, it sounded like they were talking about sexual assault, but they were kind of dancing around it. And one of the contestants was like, listen, I've been through something and I carry so much shame. And I was like, oh my God, I carry so much shame. Like I shamed myself into silence. So on this trail, having told my husband about my assault and then me too, and then all these stories and like feeling more empowered about what happened to me, realizing it wasn't my fault. Assault is never our fault. I was on this island and I was going up to the highest part of the trail, and I got up there and my body was buzzing. Like I just felt incredible. I couldn't put my finger on it. I was like, when was the last time I felt this comfortable in my body? When was the last time I felt this confident in the direction my life is going, especially right now? Like I have no reason to be confident. I've done the literal worst thing on paper, which is quit your job without a backup plan. Like, why do I feel so good? When was the last time I felt this good? What goes up must come down. So I was on my way down this really steep, gravelly, slick kind of like fire road that they called a trail. It was awful. And I felt my feet start to slip out from under me, and I caught myself, and I had my trekking poles to help take the tension off my knees. And I put my poles in the ground. I resituated my feet. I took a deep breath. And then in the space between exhale and next thought, it was like a universal 2x4 just smacked me in the face. And I realized that the last time I felt this good was before my assault. And in that moment, I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I felt free. And come to find out, I'd have a lot of work and healing and therapy and hiking to do to move through that realization. But in that moment, everything made sense. All the decisions I made as a trauma response came into context. All of the poor relationship choices I made because I didn't value myself and I didn't think I was worthy of healthy relationships made sense. All the uncharacteristic behaviors that happened that my family was super confused about after the assault that weren't me. It was me in trauma tornadoes, spiraling, lashing out, reacting instead of responding. All of that made sense. And I was like, oh my God, what a breath of fresh air. This is so great. Like, what else is possible for me out here? So hiking my feelings started on this mountain as an idea. I put that container around it for myself. I was like, well, what else is possible? If I can hike, what's available to me emotionally out here? How can the hiking help me process? And so I had this beautiful experience on the Trans Catalina Trail in 2018. And as soon as I got back to cell service, I called I sent a DM to the Catalina Conservancy on Instagram. And I was like, listen, unless you guys are trying to keep this trail a secret, how can I help? Like, I want to spread the word about this trail. I want to tell everyone and their mother about this trail. And they introduced me to the head of outdoor programming for the Southern California REI stores. So I shared my story of like hiking and healing on this island. And I get done talking to this person that I've never met before. And they're like, oh my gosh, we'd love to send you on a speaking tour around Southern California. What do you need for audiovisual? And I was like, what do you need for audiovisual? Like, I'm just telling you stories of this hike and how it changed my life. Like, this isn't a presentation. It could be, but I was like, okay, fake it till you make it. Let's go. Okay. So if you want me to do like a technical trail review, we can project an image of the elevation gain. I can tell tell people how much it sucks and send them on their way. If we want to talk about like the feelings and the hiking and all the revelations I had, I'd be happy to do that. I've got some great pictures of me having these moments on the trail. I'd love to share those too. They're like, oh no, second one, like all the feelings. I was like, even the part about the assault? And they're like, yeah, like if you come here and tell people that the trail is hard, nobody's going to want to hear that. If you tell them that the trails change your life, that's captivating. And I was like, okay, cool, let's do it. So in 2018, in October, we did 3 dates. I loved it. We did a talk on Friday at an REI store, and then we did a hike on Saturday morning. Because if I'm going to tell you that hiking helped me heal my mind and body and like sing the praises for the healing power of nature, I want to show you what I'm talking about. I don't want to leave you hanging. So we'd go for these hikes, and then we had so much fun. My husband and I ended up selling all of our stuff. We moved into a 1998 Chevy van. Welcome to the Hiking My Feelings headquarters. Do you love my curtains? We're in it. And we toured the country. So in 2019, we expanded that REI tour to go all the way around the US. We did more than 140 events in 2019. I wrote my book while I was on the road. It was like the longer version of the talk I was giving, equating the 2016 hike, the 2018 hike, and all the lessons learned along the way. And then the pandemic happened. I was a week into my book tour. We had retreats and workshops and all this cool stuff planned through the US and Canada. And as we all know, that all went away. So in the time that has passed, now we've hosted more than 400 events around the United States. Our Take a Hike Diabetes campaign last year was so successful. We had more community members joining than I could have possibly predicted. And together, we hiked more than 54,000 miles for diabetes prevention, awareness, and management. It was awesome. One of the coolest stories that came out of that campaign was this guy, Kevin. He's in his 50s. He lives with type 2. He's been an avid fisherman for most of his life. He wanted to do more hiking and backpacking, and he had his eyes set on a backpacking trip, but he just kept putting it off. He couldn't get out there. He was too scared. He didn't feel prepared. He was worried about his weight. He was worried about his blood sugar levels. During the Take a Hike Diabetes campaign, he worked with my husband every Monday. They got together, they talked about his goals, they talked about his gear, they talked about safety, they talked about blood sugar, they talked about nutrition. And over the course of the last year, that person hiked more than 1,000 miles. He went from like casual hiking to get to a fishing spot to more than 1,000 miles in a year. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to go climb Everest. You don't have to go hike from Mexico to Canada on one of these long scenic trails like the Pacific Crest Trail. You can do this in your neighborhood to start. Strap on a pair of sneakers, grab a water bottle, bring your phone with you so you have it if you need it, but don't listen to music. Don't listen to podcasts. Don't watch TV while you're walking. Like, just give yourself the time and space to have time for you, and then see what comes up. And one of the ways that we like to introduce people to this is through our Trail Thoughts activity. So I'm going to walk you through what we do for our Trail Thoughts. This is an exercise that we offer in each module of our Blaze Your Own Trail to Self-Love program. It's 12 modules to help you build self-trust, build a hiking practice, learn about self-reflection, learn about hiking as a mindfulness practice. It's awesome. So a Trail Thought, really simply, is like when you're in a seated or guided meditation and the person guiding it says, if your brain starts to get squirrely, return to your breath. Well, if you're in motion and you're hiking, we're hoping that you're breathing. So step number 1, remember to breathe. Also, if your mind starts to get squirrely, we give you a trail thought to focus on. So one of my favorite ones, in the spirit of the recent eclipse and all the new moon energy and bringing in like whatever we want into our lives and manifesting these healthy lives that we want to have living with diabetes. One of my favorite trail thoughts is, what can I release in order to create more room for adventure in my life? So when you start going on a hike, you think about that. You're like, I'm thinking things. Ask yourself that question, see what comes up. You start worrying about your kids or your partner or your job or your lack thereof or all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world today, come back to the thought. There's plenty of time to doom scroll. There's plenty of times to be informed and be an advocate and be an activist, but we have to carve out time for ourselves. And trail thoughts are a really good way to do that. So one of the reasons we like this activity so much is hiking is an opportunity, one, to come home to yourself through breath, through movement, through hearing your inner voice. Without the podcasts and the music, you're actually able to just be with yourself. And if you're a trauma survivor, even just as a person with diabetes, it can be scary. If you don't feel safe in your body, if you don't like the voice that's inside your head, that can feel like I'm issuing homework that is a personal attack. And if that's the case, then listen to some inspiring music to ease yourself into this. Like, allow yourself to internalize messages that are positive. If you're not able to give yourself that right now for yourself, allow the music to do it for you. It's also an opportunity to build self-trust, because when we're thinking about setting goals, if you're setting a goal for fitness or for diabetes management, you can take one step each day to get you closer to that goal. And that doesn't always mean I got to go do my walk or I'm off the wagon. Rest is a step towards accomplishing your goals. We have so much going on in the world that we live in today. I equate hiking and resting as equal importance. If I can't feel like resting, like if I'm feeling rested, I'm going hiking. If I'm not hiking, I'm resting. Outside of work and all my other responsibilities as a human on planet Earth, this is an opportunity for me to carve out time for myself and build self-trust. And it's so important to remember that you are worthy of rest. That is part of self-care. You do not have to be productive all the time. Time is a man-made construct. It doesn't matter. We are raised in a weird society that thinks that if we're resting, we're worthless. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I know you've all heard, if your cup ain't full, you can't pour from it. You know, some variation of that phrase, but it's true. We have to put on our own oxygen masks first. We have to fill up our cups so we have something to pour from. And hiking, going for a walk, is a really great way to do it. And honestly, you've got diabetes. If you've got people that are harping on you about your schedule, use this disease as your excuse to take care of yourself. If you're hard, if it's hard for you to say no, if it's hard for you to do boundaries, like start with diabetes as the boundary. If somebody's like, hey, I need you to do this, you're like, cool, I'll get to it when I get back from my walk. It's for my diabetes health. Like, you can use this chronic illness that wants to come with all the stigma and all the shame and all the things that come with being diagnosed with diabetes, all the challenges, and turn it into something really beautiful for yourself, to develop a relationship with yourself. And lastly, hiking is also an opportunity to connect to the land. I'm currently in Julian, California, up in the mountains in my van, which is the land of the Kumeyaay people. There's a really great app called Native Land. And if you go to the website native-land.ca, you can plug in your address and you can see who are the first people that lived and worked and loved and stewarded the lands that we now live, work, and play on. And then from there, you can do more research on these tribes and you can understand how people used the land then, and imagine what it must have been like before your favorite city was a city. Like, what did this landscape look like before it was a metropolis? So it's a really cool opportunity to connect to the land in understanding the indigenous use. We also do a sense of place meditation that's really simple. All you have to do is sit down, maybe under a tree in your yard. Maybe you have a favorite park. Maybe you have a trail nearby that you hike all the time, but you sit down and you just go through your senses. What does it feel like where I'm sitting? How is my body connected to the earth? What is the surface that I'm sitting on? What are my attachment points to the planet at this point? Is it my butt? Is it my whole backside because I'm laying down? What can I feel? Like, where is the wind coming from? What is the sun doing? Like, what direction is the sun shining on my face? What are the birds and animals and flowers and trees and stuff that are in this area? And if you pick one specific place and do this throughout the year, you'll start to notice all the beautiful things that are right outside your door. You'll start to notice how the sun sets in one spot in the winter and it moves across the horizon to the summer, and then it moves back as the earth gets closer and further from the sun. You'll see how the trees change colors. You'll understand which birds come through and live year round and which birds just come in for a little bit to migrate and breed. Like, it is next level awareness to understand where you are, who was here before you, and what other beings, trees, plants, animals, humans, share this space with you. So with this, I'm going to send the Trail Thoughts worksheet. So you should have a copy of this that outlines everything that we shared. It tells you how to set an intention for your hike, what to do as far as a ritual is concerned. If you're hiking by yourself versus with a group, like, how can you bring this into your hiking club? Or if you go walk with your neighbor or your partner or your family, like, how you can integrate this into a group of more than just you. And it also has the outline for what we do after we hike. So we go through all this, we do our sense of place meditation, we're thinking about our trail thought. And at the end of every hike, I ask myself the same questions. First of all, I keep track of the statistics. Like, what was I eating, drinking? What was my blood sugar at? What was the trail I did? So I can understand my progression of hiking, like, how far am I going? How much elevation gain am I experiencing? And so forth. And then what were my biggest wins? Like, did I have an epiphany? Did I come to a realization of how I should have this difficult conversation? And did I learn how to feel confident and walk through that conversation on the trail? Yes, jot it down. What lessons did I learn? If you've been out there thinking about things, something that happened in your past, something that's happening currently, if you had a deeper understanding or you came to an awareness about a possible solution, write it down. What are you thankful for right now? No matter how dark and stormy my life gets, gratitude is the one thing that can always pull me out of it. And sometimes it's really hard to find something to be grateful for. Sometimes I just say, I woke up and I'm breathing and I'm grateful. Even if that part feels like a lie, there's always something to be grateful for. A blue sky, a nice breeze, changing leaves, a bird singing. There's all kinds of things you can be grateful for. What am I feeling right now? How am I feeling right now? What came up for you on the hike? Was it a joyful experience? You're shaking hands, kissing babies, walking through your neighborhood? Were you doubled over, ugly crying like I do on the trail when I'm processing something hard? Write down what's happening. What did you see and hear? This is where I like to play wildlife bingo. If you're out on a trail for like more than a couple hours, I usually make a list of the animals that are in the area, and then I like try to check them all off. Like when we go to the Grand Tetons, I'm like, I want to see a moose, I want to see a goat, I want to see a bear, like from a safe distance. I want to see a bison. Like I want to see all these different animals that live in these different spaces. And as you do these different kinds of deep dives into the areas that you're exploring, you're becoming more connected to the land as a result, just by thinking about, oh, I wonder what I could see out here today. And then you can look forward to it. And then you might be surprised by the stuff that you didn't know that was there. Did anything stand out? Did you run into somebody who also has diabetes and now you're out here telling diabetes to take a hike? What stood out for you on this hike? Were you impressed by your ability to climb the hill that's murdered your legs last week and now you're cruising? Write it down. And finally, did I use any specific mantras today? In my book, on that first trail, or my first time on the Trans-Catalina Trail, I had two mantras, right foot, left foot, because sometimes I had to slow my entire life and existence down to one step at a time, quite literally. And when I couldn't go anymore, and my husband reminded me, the trail's not getting shorter, the day's not getting longer, we got to keep moving. Even if it's slow, we got to keep going. I literally took it one step at a time. And that practice and using hiking as a mindfulness activity makes it a lot easier to do that in my everyday life. I also had a mantra, you can do hard things. So like I would be like sobbing, snot running down my face, winded, blister city. And I'd just be like, okay, you can do hard things, Sydney. You can do hard things. And you'll find if you clear out the music, if you clear out the podcast, if you allow yourself to be open to the experience of spending time in nature, these mantras kind of just surface. It's like a thought that just kind of repeats itself. And that could be a really good clue as to something that could help you get through a stressful situation off the trail. If you're at work and your boss is barking at you and your team's not helping you with what you need, you have a mantra to fall back on. So we'll send out these worksheets so you have access to them. We have programs and retreats that we would love to invite you to. And if there's anything else that I can do to help you in your pursuit of managing diabetes, finding your wellness in the wilderness, please let me know. Some great resources that we have that are free, the Trail Thoughts worksheets. Our YouTube channel is full of videos to get you inspired by some of the beautiful areas that are out here in the United States. And I also have a new show that starts on November 29th. It's called Wellness in the Wilderness with your girl, Sydney Williams. And it airs on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific on the Voice America Empowerment channel. And we're taking a look at how people find wellness in the wilderness. Maybe hiking's not your bag. Maybe you like fishing. Maybe you like rock climbing. Maybe you like bird watching. Anything that gets you off the device and into the wilderness, whatever the wilderness is for you. A city park could be the wilderness if you live in a concrete jungle. Let's be serious. You don't have to go to Yosemite. You don't have to go do Everest. Whatever wilderness is for you, these open spaces, these natural spaces, these green spaces that draw you in and make you feel a little bit more connected to the world we're living in, those are the places we'd like for you to go. And I would love to share some of the stories with my guests and my own stories of how I find wellness in the wilderness with you to inspire your journey on diabetes management in the outdoors. So if you have any questions at all, you can email me, Sydney@hikingmyfeelings.org. That's SYDNEY @hikingmyfeelings.org. Follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, tune in into the show that starts November 29th at 1 p.m. Pacific. And I got to tell you, if you let it, diabetes can change your life for the better. I know that sounds wild, but literally everything good that is in my life right now is because I was diagnosed with diabetes and I saw it as an opportunity, not as a death sentence. So if I can leave you with one thing, I hope it's that. And just know that if you ever have any questions about hiking or any other kind of outdoorsy things, diabetes management, how to quit your job and not like die in the process, I got your back. I'm your girl. And thank you so much for having me.